Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
We're jumping into a whole stack of sources today, really trying to cut through the noise.
Yeah, finding out what actually matters from, well, everything circulating. Markets, tech, global stuff, even how folks are affording dinner.
Exactly. We've got articles, some research notes
Yeah.
covering, market estimates, big tech moves, or maybe some non-moves.
Right, like Apple and Google. Plus, we're looking at public health policy shifts, some geopolitical friction.
And those surprising everyday trends, yeah. Our mission for you is pretty straightforward. Pull out the key insights, connect some dots that might seem pretty far apart.
So we're digging into why analysts might be, lowering expectations a bit.
And the big economic tests coming up this week.
Plus, how tariffs are maybe hitting your grocery bill.
And what Apple's big design shift really means. Why OpenAI is suddenly using Google's cloud.
And that dating for dinner thing you mentioned. It's quite the mix.
It really is. It's about seeing those threads, right? Understanding the forces kind of shaping things right now.
Definitely. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's do it. Starting with markets and the economy. And the big picture, well, it doesn't exactly scream party time, does it?
No, analysts have actually trimmed both revenue and profit estimates for a majority of S&P 500 companies this year.
So what's the insight there? Is this like a big slowdown signal or maybe something else?
Well, it sounds bearish, sure, but the insight might just be that expectations are, finally getting a bit more realistic. Maybe they got a little ahead of themselves before.
Ah, okay. So more like moderation.
Yeah, suggests corporate outlooks are moderating. And that kind of sets the stage for these key economic tests this week.
Right, and those tests sound pretty crucial, especially for the bond market, based on the sources.
Definitely. We've got major inflation data coming out, CPI tomorrow.
From the Bureau of Labor Statistics, yeah.
And then the Producer Price Index, the PPI, on Thursday.
These aren't just numbers, are they? They feel like moments of truth for where inflation's headed.
That's a good way to put it. Economists are generally expecting, modest increases for May. But
if it comes in hotter than expected.
Yeah. Any upside surprise could definitely rattle investors, could shift views on interest rates for sure.
And then there are the Treasury auctions adding to the pressure cooker.
Right. $39 billion of 10-year notes tomorrow and $22 billion of 30-year bonds on Thursday.
How are people looking at those?
They're seen as a real test. Like, how much appetite is there really for long-term government debt right now?
Because of the deficit and debt situation.
Exactly. That's become a bigger backdrop. Yields have climbed because investors want more compensation for holding that debt. So these auctions, they give us clues.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting connecting things. The sources suggest tariffs, the cost of trade wars, might actually start pushing inflation back up.
Yeah, there's some evidence for that. A New York Fed survey done back in early May kind of shows how it works.
How so?
It found businesses facing tariff hikes are passing those costs along, something like 90% of manufacturers.
90%, wow.
And about 3/4 of service firms. They passed on at least some of the higher costs to customers, higher prices.
And they did it quickly, too.
Super quickly. Over half raised prices within just a month.
A month. And the tariff increases themselves were pretty steep.
Yeah, manufacturers saw average rates jump about 25 percentage points in 6 months. Service firms around 17 points.
And you said this survey was before some of the latest policy shifts.
Correct. So the exact path forward is a bit uncertain. But the survey, strong evidence that businesses have been passing tariff hits straight to consumers.
And we're seeing this with actual companies like J.M. Smucker, Folgers, Jif.
Yep. They expect profits for their next fiscal year through April 2026 to miss the consensus. And one reason they cited, absorbing some tariff costs.
After previously raising prices to pass them on, yeah.
Exactly. So a pretty direct link there.
And another one feeling pressure is United Natural Foods, the distributor.
Right. They couldn't raise their full-year sales outlook, even though recent results were better. Now, it wasn't just tariffs.
But
they're still dealing with the fallout from a cyberattack, apparently, and also losing 700 jobs because they're exiting a supply deal.
So it just shows how companies can get hit by multiple things at once.
Precisely. Multiple pressures hitting simultaneously.
Okay, pulling back to the stock market again. One thing that really jumped out from the sources was this weird dynamic. Risky stuff like the S&P 500 climbing, But so is gold, the safe haven.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it? It really shows these conflicting narratives playing out.
What do I mean by that?
Well, on one hand, you've got optimism, right, pushing the S&P higher. But on the other, there's enough worry or demand for safety that people are also piling into gold.
So the market's hedging its bets.
Yeah,
Or maybe just different groups acting differently.
could be both. Different investors, different outlooks, all at the same time. The source is also mentioned within the S&P 500. Even though the biggest mega caps have had mixed results lately, they're still crushing the smallest companies in the index. Another sign of, unevenness.
And tech stocks.
Right.
They've been hot, but some experts quoted aren't convinced it'll last across the board.
Right. Some recommend sticking to large caps, maybe the more established names for now. And then you have PIMCO, the bond giant.
What are they saying?
They're making a pretty strong case that stocks are just expensive compared to bonds, like the most expensive in nearly 25 years.
Wow. So they're saying buy bonds.
Pretty much. Position in high-quality bonds.
Yeah.
And they connect this to what they call a new global order.
A new global order. What's that mean?
It suggests they believe there are fundamental shifts happening, in trade, supply chains, global alliances, things that are likely going to stick around.
And in that kind of world.
The predictability and yield of good bonds look pretty attractive compared to maybe overvalued stocks.
Gotcha. Okay, let's look globally for a sec. China's electric vehicle market. The sources are calling it a bruising price war.
Oh, yeah. Led by BYD, the market leader there. And it's not just like normal competition.
Wow.
It's seriously depressing profits for manufacturers, for sellers, everyone. Some executives are really sounding the alarm.
How bad is it?
The head of Great Wall Motor actually compared it to an Evergrande-like crisis, the huge real estate collapse. He said it just hasn't fully erupted yet.
That's quite a comparison.
Yeah.
And BYD is cutting prices hard.
Steeply, up to 34% on some models. Their cheapest car is now around, $7,700 US?
Incredible. That kind of pressure must be intense.
So intense that even used car dealers are reportedly losing money. They're worried.
Even the government's weighing in.
Yeah, the official Communist Party paper warned these disorderly price wars are unsustainable, a race to the bottom. And a government-backed group told companies point blank, don't dump vehicles below cost.
Tells you how bad it is.
It really does. And maybe the weirdest detail, this thing called zero-mileage used cars.
Look at that.
Cars that get registered and plated but never driven, just to, pump up the sales numbers on paper.
Desperate times, huh?
Shows the extreme measures some are taking just to stay afloat.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. Tech world. Apple's WWDC, the developer conference, happened recently. And the verdict on AI seems kind of meh.
Yeah, underwhelmed was the word used in the sources, especially from some analysts, like at UBS.
Why?
They felt the AI features announced were pretty incremental, stuff competitors already offer. It sounds like investors are still pushing Apple for, bigger AI moves.
And Apple themselves admitted some delays.
Yeah.
On the more advanced stuff.
They did. Things like the more personal Siri, other Apple Intelligence features. They said they need more time to meet our high-quality bar. Still expected sometime in the coming year, though.
Okay, so the immediate AI splash wasn't huge, but the main focus, maybe the real story, was this big software redesign.
Absolutely. Across iPhones, Macs, Vision Pro, the works.
They're calling it liquid glass, and it's a big deal.
First major iOS redesign since 2013. So yeah, pretty significant. It really changes the look and feel. Transparent elements, glassy surfaces, fluid animations.
Inspired by the Vision Pro headset.
Inspired by Vision OS, yeah. And apparently enabled by the power of their Apple Silicon chips. Reactions seem varied online. Some comparisons to Windows Vista's look.
Interesting. There was also a subtle change in how they name their operating systems.
Right. Moving away from sequential numbers, like iOS 18.
Dude.
Naming them after the year they come out. So iOS 26 for the one landing in September 2025, iPadOS 26, and so on.
Seems simple, but what's the strategy there?
Well, it makes it easier to refer to versions, sure, but maybe more importantly, it puts clear pressure on Apple to deliver meaningful updates every year. The year number makes it obvious if your software feels, dated.
Clever.
Yeah.
Okay, moving over to Google. Sources say they're doing a big overhaul of their internal training platform, Grow.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. They used to offer all sorts of courses, 3D printing, personal finance, you name it.
And now?
Now they're shifting focus, primarily teaching employees how to use modern AI tools in their day-to-day work.
Huh. So prioritizing business essential stuff.
Exactly. As Google streamlines things and, competes hard in the AI race, it really shows how crucial just training your own people on AI has become, even for the companies building it.
Right. And speaking of the AI race, OpenAI keeps making moves.
Definitely. One report suggests New York is becoming a real hub for AI development, apparently leads globally in enterprise ChatGPT users.
And OpenAI is leaning into that.
Big time. They have a significant and growing office there.
And here's a twist I saw mentioned. OpenAI is actually using Google Cloud services now.
Yeah, surprising, right? Given their deep ties with Microsoft.
So why do that?
It seems to be about meeting their absolutely massive computing needs, diversifying beyond Microsoft. It just highlights the incredible demand for compute power for these AI models.
Makes sense when you hear their revenue run rate reportedly hit $10 billion in June.
Whoa. Yeah, that's huge. That explains needing all the compute power they can get.
And AI isn't just software, it's driving hardware too, like Snap.
Right, Snapchat's parent company. They're planning new augmented reality smart glasses specs for 2026. Smaller, lighter.
And the AI connection.
Developers building for specs will be able to use both Google's Gemini AI and OpenAI's GPT models.
So integrating AI directly into the glasses experience.
Seems like it. And competition there is really heating up, isn't it? Apple Vision Pro, Meta's stuff, Google working with Warby Parker.
Feels like the start of a new hardware cycle, kind of driven by AI.
Could be. And it's not just tech giants using AI day to day. Look at Starbucks.
Right. They're rolling out an AI assistant for baristas.
Yeah, Green Dot Assist, built with Microsoft Azure OpenAI. Starting small, 35 locations now, but planning a broad launch in fiscal 2026.
And the goal is just making their jobs easier, faster service.
Pretty much. Quick answers via tablet, how to make a drink, troubleshoot equipment, simple stuff.
Any future plans mentioned?
They're thinking about automating IT help tickets, maybe even suggesting substitute baristas if someone calls out.
Huh. Do they worry about the AI making stuff up? Hallucinations?
They mentioned it. Said they're using a grounding engine to try and keep the info accurate.
Interesting. Okay, one last tech bit up in space. Amazon's Project Kuiper, their Starlink competitor.
Yeah, their second satellite launch got delayed. Weather, rain, high winds.
When's it rescheduled for?
Pushed from Friday to June 16th. They're sending up another 27 satellites.
Bringing the total to?
Just 54 so far, but they're racing against an FCC deadline.
What's the deadline?
They need to launch half their planned constellation, that's over 1,600 satellites, by July 2026.
Wow. So they have a lot of launching to do.
A lot. Highlights the scale and the pressure in this new space race.
Okay, let's pivot now. Geopolitics, health, society. Starting with a pretty big shakeup in public health. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. fired the entire CDC Advisory Committee on Vaccines,
Yeah?
ACIP.
All 17 members, yeah. Kennedy said it was to reestablish public confidence, citing alleged conflicts of interest.
But that's not how others saw it.
Not at all. Public health experts quoted in the sources were quite critical, very concerned.
About what specifically?
Politicizing science, basically. Disrupting a trusted process. They worry it could actually sow distrust in vaccines and federal agencies, maybe even hurt immunization rates.
Did they address the conflict of interest claim?
Yeah, experts called it completely unfounded, saying members already follow disclosure rules. The big fear seems to be that he might appoint people sympathetic to anti-vaccine views.
Leading to recommendations based on politics, not science.
That's the concern, and sources noted this seems to go against a promise Kennedy apparently made to Senator Bill Cassidy during his confirmation.
But shifting to national security. Retired General Jack Keane issued a pretty stark warning about China.
Very stark, calling the U.S. Target 1 for the Chinese Communist Party. He described what he called the most comprehensive penetration of U.S. society ever.
Covering what areas?
Cyber espionage, interference in critical sectors. He mentioned the food supply, telecommunications specifically.
And his worry is that China might try to, defeat the U.S. from within?
Yeah, defeat the American people at home if a conflict ever broke out, seeing the homeland as a vulnerability.
Was there a specific example given?
A rather alarming one. 3 Chinese nationals recently caught trying to smuggle biological materials into the U.S.
Like what?
Including a crop-killing fungus, Fusarium graminearum. Keane didn't see this as just smuggling.
He saw it as
Potential exploration, testing ways to penetrate U.S. systems, maybe even attack agriculture, the food source. A very direct illustration of the threat he's describing.
chilling. Okay, Turning to domestic political flashpoints now, just reporting what the sources said. In California, Governor Newsom is suing to block President Trump's deployment of troops to L.A.
That's right. National Guard and Marines sent to address protests related to immigration enforcement. Newsom's lawsuit calls the deployment unlawful, says it promotes unrest, calls it unprecedented.
Using words like trained warfighters onto the streets.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Trump administration insists the scale of the protest justifies the action. Necessary to protect personnel and property, prevent the city from burning, as they put it. Two very different views.
Definitely. And then there was that case in Wisconsin, the undocumented immigrant framed for threatening Trump.
Yes, some developments there. He's been granted release on $7,500 bond by a judge.
What details came out?
Police found the handwriting didn't match, noted a language barrier, and the inmate who accused him eventually admitted he wrote the threatening letters himself.
Why?
Apparently to try and get the immigrant deported.
Wow. And the Department of Homeland Security website.
Initially kept the arrest info up with the discredited allegations, though they later added a disclaimer. Just a really complex situation touching on a lot of different system dynamics.
Indeed. And finally, a much lighter note, but still kind of telling about the economy.
Yeah.
This dating for dinner trend.
Yeah, popping up on TikTok and places. Basically, singles going on dates primarily for the free meal.
As a budgeting hack.
Exactly. To save money because dining out is getting so expensive. It's striking, maybe a bit funny, but it really shows how economic pressure filters down into, well, even our personal lives and dating habits.
It really does. So looking back, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive today.
We really have. From analysts cutting corporate forecasts and those key economic tests this week,
to how tariffs are hitting companies and consumers, and that wild price war in China's EV sector.
Then we jumped into tech. Apple's big design shift, their kind of measured AI steps.
Google focusing internal training on AI, OpenAI's massive growth and compute needs.
The new race in AR glasses, and how even Starbucks is using AI day to day.
And we wrapped with some complex societal stuff, the CDC committee controversy, those national security warnings.
Domestic political tensions, the legal cases, and yeah, even dating for dinner.
It's so clear these things aren't really separate, are they? Economic pressures show up in dating habits.
Tech advances have geopolitical ripple effects. Public health decisions impact everyone.
It's all connected. So as we see AI, AR glasses, satellite networks just advancing incredibly fast, here's something for you to think about.
Okay.
How did these super fast innovations interact with, or maybe even worsen, the much slower moving fundamental challenges we face? Things like economic stability, public trust, geopolitical security.
That's a big question, right?
What does the sheer speed of tech change mean for how we even try to understand, let alone address, these really complex ongoing issues? Something to mull over.